In Nepal, the collusion of corruption and nepotism has produced a deadly cocktail. Producing the unprecedented protests that we saw, it brought down a government in under 48 hours. One such case that added fuel to the fire was a hit and run that typified this elitist mindset, this Nepo kids mindset. Hours after the ban on social media apps back on the 6th of September, an official SUV carrying the Koshi province minister Ram Bahadur Magar struck an 11-year-old Usha Magar Sunuwar outside a school in Lalitpur. And you can see the CCTV footage there. That young girl is running for her life. It shows her being flung onto the roadside. And the worst part is the vehicle just drives away. While the minor survived the crash, the incident triggered anger across the country. That was the incident that really got young people's goat and brought them out into the streets in the tens of thousands. And that is believed to have been the real flashpoint which started off these Gen Z protests, which came to a head on Monday and Tuesday. And eventually, by the end of the day on Tuesday, it brought about the fall of the KP Sharma Oli government. But these Gen Z protesters have now laid out a series of political and social demands. They have 5 big conditions. They want sweeping reforms in the governance of the country. They want investigation into the assets that have been looted by politicians over the last many years. They've demanded, A, the immediate dissolution of the current House of Representatives of the Nepalese Parliament. The protesters say they have lost public trust with the existing cabal of politicians. They want an amendment or a complete rewriting of the constitution with active participation from citizens, experts and the youth. Remember, the Nepali constitution is barely 10 years old. It was adopted formally in 2015. Conducting new elections after the interim period, ensuring that the elections are independent, it's fair, and it's based on direct public participation. The establishment of a directly elected executive leadership, the investigation into assets that have been looted over the past 3 decades, as well as illegal properties that have been acquired by these politicians to be nationalized. Structural reform and the restructuring of 5 fundamental institutions: education, health, justice, security, and communications.
Congratulations guys, सबैजनालाई नेपाल सरकार ढलिसकेको छ. The youth has won the protest, won over the country. The future is ours. हामीले गरेर सबैजना मिलेर हामीले गरेर हामीले सक्यौं हैन. I really want to thank every one of you. We are still safe here, and we'll be moving towards अब सिंहदरबार, अब माइतीघर. Thank you so much guys. Really, I just cannot. It was a dream क्या यो change को लागि क्या. And finally, we made it happen.
Nepal's Gen Z protesters now want the former Chief Justice of the Nepal Supreme Court, Sushila Karki, as the head of the interim government. Justice Karki made history after she became the first ever female Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Nepal. She served in that role between July of 2016 and June of 2017. She began her legal career in 1979 after completing her law education in Biratnagar. She's known for her zero tolerance when it comes to corruption. She earned great respect for her integrity while she was a judge and then eventually the Chief Justice. She delivered landmark rulings, notably enabling women to pass citizenship to their respective children, a right previously that was restricted to just men. Of course, while she was a Supreme Court Justice, she went on to give rulings on a number of corruption cases. There was even an impeachment motion that was moved against her, which was later unsuccessful. So the question now is, can Justice Sushila Karki be the interim Prime Minister? There is no such constitutional position in the Nepalese constitution. What sources have told investigations editor Manoj Gupta is that as per the Nepalese constitution that was adopted formally in 2015, there is no official position for an interim Prime Minister. In fact, the interim Prime Minister has to be from the sitting members of Parliament. The person who's been chosen as the interim leader, Justice Karki, is not a member of Parliament. In fact, she's a retired jurist. The army, of course, is favoring Gen Z and their demands. It's the Gen Z that picked Justice Karki to become the interim leader of the country of Nepal. But they're also trying to find legal ways, some kind of legal cover for the president, Mr. Ramchandra Paudel, to go ahead and formally appoint Justice Karki as the interim leader, who will of course lead a caretaker government and then eventually pave the way for elections. The Nepalese president, Mr. Paudel, has limited discretion in whether or not he can appoint anyone in case he decides to go ahead with Articles 76 and 77 to justify the appointment of a neutral figure, not a politician, not an existing MP or a member of parliament, if no party can then form a majority in the Nepalese parliament. In this case, the president has the option to declare emergency in the country and thereby give legal cover to the appointment of Justice Sushila Karki as the interim leader of Nepal. There's also a second scenario that's possible, and that is if the army decides and it forces the political parties to reach a deal, then the political parties can nominate Justice Karki as the new interim leader of Nepal. I want to go across to Koshraj Koirala. He's the editor of Republica Daily, joining us live from Kathmandu. So tell us a little bit more about why the Gen Z protesters have settled on Justice Karki. What is going to be her remit? What is going to be her mandate? Just in terms of what the way forward is for Nepal after these rather unprecedented scenes that we've seen over the last couple of days.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think it's it's not clear yet, and negotiations are going on. And there are different groups of Gen group, and they're also trying to force consensus among themselves. Like a section of Gen they prefer Balinsa, the mayor of Kathmandu metropolitan city, while a majority of Gen they are preferring former Chief Justice Sushila Karki, partly because of her, strong stance against corruption. And during her tenure as Chief Justice, she had played a very important role. And some other candidates are also in the fray, like some JNGs are also talking about Kulman Gising, who actually headed Nepal's state utility, Nepal Electricity Authority. So few other candidates are also there, but then majority of the JNGs, they are with Sushila Karki. But in terms of mandate, it's not clear. As you rightly mentioned, Constitution does not pave the way for, appointing someone outside the parliament. So President Ramchandra Paudel is in negotiation with other political parties as well. And this afternoon, Nepali Congress and CPN-UML, the two largest parties, they have issued a press statement saying that any way out to the current political impasse should be found within the constitutional bound. That means the constitution should not be violated in a way, because as you mentioned, there are different ways to make sure that to give legal cover to any such appointments. So in terms of mandate, as you were just asking, basically GNGs, they were very much frustrated with misgovernance, rampant corruption, and failure of political parties to deliver their promises. And this was not the first time. Earlier there was pro-monarchy group. There were also so many youths. They were also like the frustrated youths. They had joined in the protest earlier in March. So basically, their demand is that politicians are having all the luxuries and all. Mm-hmm. Their children are having good life, but the ordinary people, they could not have any meaningful changes, even after the promises made by political parties.
So one of the things I noticed, Mr. Koirala, about the five major demands placed by Gen Z, they want the dissolution of the current parliament, they want fresh elections, direct elections to directly elect the people's representatives. Are we looking at any kind of timeline? How soon this new interim government can come together? What sort of timeline and road ahead is Justice Karki, assuming that she's the one who will head the interim government? How much of a timeline do they have to conduct these elections? And what's to say that those elections will be free and fair? Because in the past, in Nepal, there have been, on numerous occasions, allegations of elections being rigged.
I think you are right. And it will take, I think, a relatively longer time, because, you need to be able to force consensus with including these political actors, not just GNGs. Like, if you just ask me, like, even today, the Nepali Congress and CPN-UML, they have the strength to bring, 500,000, even 1 million people in the street of Kathmandu. If these GNGs who are negotiating with the president and the army chief, if they are not able to force consensus with the existing political parties, the major political parties, that will not be widely accepted, solution. So the thing is, first, JNG has to come to a conclusion. They have to force consensus among themselves. And then that consensus has to be negotiated with the political parties. And once political parties also agreed to their way out the solution they proposed, then only the process of forming interim government and election and everything begins. Otherwise, I don't think it will just take place anytime soon.
All right, Mr.
It will
Koirala.
take
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Koshraj Koirala is the editor of the Republica Daily, joining us live from Kathmandu. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Let's try and go across to a Congress Member of Parliament, Mr. Manish Tiwari, who has spoken about this issue. In fact, you tweeted earlier today, Mr. Tiwari, that you find it naive to think that it's a coincidence that what happened in Dhaka last year and what's happened now in Kathmandu are coincidental, and it's just a spontaneous protest, this Gen Z Nepo protest that was being undertaken by the Nepalese young people. You think it needs to be probed as to whether it was spontaneous or whether there were some other interests at play. Why do you say that?
Well, Zaka, thank you very much for having me on your show and your channel. It's been a while, and it's always good to have a conversation with you. Look, what is happening in Nepal is absolutely worrying. When you contextualize it in the context of the question that you asked as to whether what happened in Bangladesh last year or what happened in Sri Lanka earlier in 2018, were there organic, homegrown protests against legitimate malgovernance, aspirations that young people have, unemployment, income inequality, or is someone tapping into this angst and anger, given that South Asia has a huge youth demographic bulge, and then leveraging it and mobilizing it in order to bring about undemocratic regime change, is something which needs to be gone into very deeply. And how come that South Asia suddenly has become the epicenter? Because this weaponization of social media and its use in order to channelize and tap discontent in a particular manner, which is then targeted at bringing about regime change. Sheikh Hasina had to flee in the most ungraceful circumstances. Prime Minister Oli had to step down. A former Prime Minister's wife was burnt to death. You had finance ministers and other ministers being chased and stripped in the streets of Kathmandu. It's something which should worry us, since we are the preeminent power in this region.
No, the two follow-up questions to that. One, if you feel that it needs to be probed, it needs to be investigated as to whether this is spontaneous or whether there is some vested interests at play. The issue is, every time India thinks of that in its neighborhood or wherever else, and particularly so in its neighborhood, there leads to some kind of local resentment against India, displaying big brother attitude, so on and so forth. All of these populations, the students in Kathmandu, the students in Dhaka, the young people in Sri Lanka, would all have us believe that this is spontaneous. And the more Indian diplomats or Indian media speculates on whether there is something more to it that meets the eye, it only fuels more anti-India sentiment there. So how do you see that difficulty, that balancing act, as it were?
Well, that's a brilliant question. And yes, it's a paradox, because obviously every country guards its sovereignty very, very closely. However, if you were to accept it on face value, then the obvious question would be Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, who is going to be next? So that's why I'm saying, for example, this Nepo kids trained in Nepal, which became the sine qua non of this entire movement, which led to the current impasse that all 77 districts in Nepal are completely out of control. The armies had to step in. Now, was this an organic, homegrown trend against some rich, brash kids actually posting some very obscene and ostentatious pictures which flash wealth, when a bulk of the Nepalese young people have to go out of the country in order to find employment? Or was someone actually using this in a very calibrated and clinical manner in order to create instability, because there are forces which benefit out of instability in nations? And for India to become absolutely placid and languid and quiet and say, well, this is a matter of state sovereignty, we will accept whatever is happening in our neighborhood, I'm afraid it doesn't work like that, because ultimately what happens in Sri Lanka, Nepal, or Bangladesh, or Bhutan, or for that matter, even Pakistan, has implications on India.